So last week we were exploring how to deal with our enemies. We looked at how Jesus dealt with his enemies and how he instructed us to do the same. In Matthew 44. Boy, get the mouth going here. He said this, he said, "Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that persecute you or hate you, and pray for those who persecute you." And we talked about your enemies. They could be a myriad of things. It could be your own body or an illness that you're experiencing or a loved one is experiencing. It might be a colleague who challenges you in a work situation. It could be a loved one making poor choices, or a divorce, or a death, or a myriad of other things that feel like they are against us when we are in the midst of trying to navigate through them. You know, that may have worked for Jesus in his Christed nature. And sometimes it feels like, at least in my experiencing, trying to follow these instructions leave us wide open to have more of it. People look at us as weak, or they look at us as, I'm able to manipulate, or I'm able to overpower you. You know, that whole power over thing. And yet, it seems like, paradoxically, if we're willing to do this, it doesn't leave us defensiveless. It leaves us with a greater power in which to show up and be that expression of God in the world. To give up being defensive in the presence of a threat is not easy. It is our go-to, at least for most of us, it is our go-to emotion, it is our go-to thought process. As soon as we feel a threat, we want to then protect. And in order to be able to step into living from these principles, we have to begin to see it differently, to understand it differently, to re-educate ourselves about what's happening when those situations show up in our life. The author writes this, he says, "The first step in making friends with conflict is in understanding what conflict is, so the energy of conflict can be directed into positive avenues of understanding, of healing, of spiritual growth, and ultimately of love." So we have to start with that understanding of what this is and why it's showing up for us. Simply defined, conflict is an interference pattern of energies. It is a pattern of energies that are working against each other. There is resistance that happens when there is an interference in how energy moves. Whenever there's a change, whenever there's movement or resistance or pressure, this is true in the outer world, it's true in our own world, there exists the potential for conflict because everything is not flowing like a peaceful river. All of a sudden there's turbulence, there's rocks that show up that make the water ripple. And change is that one constant that we all experience in life. It is the very heartbeat of the universe itself. For most of us, this interference starts pretty young. That first time that we felt separate from God, and we start taking on feelings of unworthiness. We start believing that we are flawed. Not anybody's fault, but it is just how most of us, when we're young, when we receive messages that tell us that something's wrong or bad with us, we take them in and we own them as a belief because we don't know any better. We don't have any other filters. And as Gary likes to say, unless you had Joseph and Mary as your parents, and I'm not even so sure that they could even claim that, you know, most of us had parents who were in their own process and who were flawed, who were doing the best they could in the moment, but yet it always wasn't exactly what we needed to meet our needs. All outer conflict begins and is expressed from inner conflict. I want you to hear that again. All outer conflict starts within. I don't care who it is, what we are experiencing in our outer world is being created from the inner life that we're experiencing. So outer conflict is simply a mirror for each of us to our own inner conflict. Now, I know there's a part of me that goes, can argue, no, that can't be true because I don't have that kind of conflict. I don't do those kinds of things. I don't act that way. I don't say those kinds of things that seems to be stirring up the conflict. But it's an inner mirror to us because it's reflecting back to us the parts that are disconnected from God. It is mirroring back to us in some way or some level the parts of us that are still seeking to be healed, that are still wanting to be made whole. Your soul, and each of us have one, that's that spiritual part of us, is always seeking to push each of us towards spiritual growth. Because that's ultimately what we have come to this earth to do. And your resistance to that is what produces that stress, that discomfort, and even at times a storm. When you resist the movement of spirit, so this is about being in alignment with where Spirit's calling you to be and to do and to express, or our ego. When there's resistance between the two, it causes friction. It causes that interference to happen. This past week, I was out on Facebook, and just as an awareness for you, I don't get out on Facebook very often. So if you think I'm going to see a post that you have, and I have like 1,500 friends. So if I'm scrolling through my wall, the chances of me seeing something that you posted and responding to it are probably not high. That's not the best way to communicate or hope that I become aware of something. But I usually go out there for some specific reason, and depending on how many minutes I have, I may scroll through. And I happened to see this video of Michael Murdad, and I don't know how many of you might remember him. He was here several times years ago. Here's a hint. He's the guy who looks like Jesus. Maybe for some of you that have been around for a while, that'll make sense to you, because he really does look like an image of what Jesus might have been in the body of. And so I watched it a little bit because it was about inner conflict and inner peace. I'm like, that's what I'm going to be speaking on. Let me just see what Michael has to say. And he shared in that video that he, from his perspective, saw that there were 5 stages from moving from inner conflict to inner peace. And that's, again, what we're looking to address is our inner conflict. Yes, there are tools that we can address that outer conflict that's happening, but if we believe that premise that it all starts within, that's the place that we can begin. He describes the first stage as what I'm going to call self-medicating. When there's a conflict going on, the ego, that part of us that just wants to feel safe and feel all right, often will find whatever outer tools that they can use to make that happen. It might be to help us feel better. It might be to distract us. And it is a tool, albeit not a very effective one, that we're using to try and heal whatever those inner conditions are. I would gather to say that every one of us have probably experienced the stage 1, the first stage that we are working towards moving from inner conflict to inner healing. So I have a question for you this morning, and I'm out here. I can see the comments out on live stream. How have you self-medicated? How much time do you have? Just give me the highlights. Alcoholism. Yes. Drugs. How else? Retail therapy. Yes, I've used that one numerous times. How else? Food. Sweets. I've done, a check. Maybe most of you can identify with, if not all, some of these. How else? Sleep. Sleep might be another one. Julie, TV, reading is what she's sharing out online. How else? How about being a victim? blaming them for whatever you're feeling and experiencing in your life. Oh, this is eldest daughter, zebra cakes. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing that. Work. Yes, I've done the whole work, just throw myself into work to try and block out everything else that's going on. Anything else? Well, there's probably lots of other ways, because as many as us that there are many other ways that we can experience that. So to move from stage 1 to stage 2, because you got to get through all the stages, it's difficult to jump right to stage 5. It's a process. But stage 2 is the place where we go, this just isn't working, and we start seeking out outer support or outer ways in which we can manage our own inner conflict. That might be joining an AA group. It might be reading a self-help book. It might be coming to church. It might be a therapy group. It might be books. It might be learning about forgiveness or prayer or trying to have some compassion for that person. There's a whole myriad of ways in which we then try and seek to understand. That's really what we're looking for, is to seek to understand and to know that we're not alone in it. Because there is a lot of source of comfort to know that we're not the only one struggling with this. We're not the only one going through all this. The next stage calls us to apply what we've learned. This is where the rubber meets the road right here, folks, because it's not enough just to hear about it and even to agree with it and even to have that be a place where you can now even speak to others about it and tell them what they need to do to resolve their own inner conflict. But until we begin to apply what we've learned, we will not truly experience it. We have to practice living from what this expanded awareness calls us more and more often. And the fourth stage, as he describes it, allows us to see how effective our practice has been. And so it is that opportunity when it rolls around again to say, how well have I moved through this? How easily am I being triggered by this now? How much work have I been able to do that allows me to be in that experience and not have it diminish my own inner experience of it? And then finally, we arrive at the moment of inner peace, even if it's just fleeting, because we love it when we just are in that state of bliss. And yet, it's not the place where we necessarily will be able to live from all of the time, because there'll be another opportunity to grow even more, unless we've achieved that fully Christed awareness. We get to see, when we're in that state, life unfolding through God's eyes. I love that. When we are in that place of inner peace, we actually now can see how all of this might be unfolding through God's eyes. I've done this circle of stages many, many times, and especially the last 20 years, but certainly probably closer to 30. And I remember when I first came here how excited I was that I was going to have tools, that there was actually going to be something that would help me, navigate this. And of course, the first class I took, and just about every course that I've taken, forgiveness was integral in one of those practices, because it is probably one of the most transformative ways that we can let go. And there's all different kinds of ways to forgive. There's all different people who have different lenses on it. And what I discovered was you just have to do it. And you have to do it sometimes over and over and over again. I remember probably sharing this when I was here 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Certainly as I was there for the almost 10 years in Roanoke, they heard about this. But probably one of my biggest challenges in inner peace has been with my older brother. This has been this way since we were children, and even as we got to adults, and I hoped that we could move past that. Every time, and we did not live in the same cities, and we still don't for most of our adult lives. So it would just be those few times a year where we would gather together as a family. And family gatherings are the place where you can really find all those little buttons. They just seem to show up at that. And so I remember, okay, I'm going to go through this forgiveness process. I'm going to understand it. I'm going to apply it. And then I would feel good. Whew, got that done. And then I'd see my brother again. Boom, stage 4. Nope, more work to be done. Yeah, no, those buttons are still quite active there. Go back to the forgiveness process, apply it. Okay, feel good. And, this had been going on for 15 or 20 years. I don't know. It's like onions, where there's lots of layers to all of this. And it's probably been now 8 years. I think it's been 8 years when the last time I had gone back where I really was triggered was when my dad was dying. And first night I was there, blow up. I mean, to the place, he found the explode button. Normally there's just triggers and I can walk away. I was screaming, and I don't scream. You could ask my daughter. I'm not a screamer, but I was at the top of my lungs, letting it all go, probably, however many years, 50-some pent-up years of things, let me tell you why. And then I walked out, and I went to another room, and I think for the first time, truly, sincerely, from the bottom of my soul, said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be this person. I'm giving it all to you, God. I don't know how to do this forgiveness stuff exactly, but I'm just releasing it all. And I want to tell you, so I'm telling you the backstory because it wasn't like it was miraculously gone. There was a lot of work done, but there has not been a button to be found since then, and it has changed our relationship in ways that I could never. Now, are we good buddies? Are we going to go on vacation together? Are we going to hang out? Probably not. We're just that different of people. But when I see him, I can love him. When he does the same thing he's always been doing, it's not like he's changed a bit. I can laugh, I can embrace him, I can tease him, and whew, peace inside. This is how these stages work. And I get those moments of bliss with that. Now, there's lots of other parts of life where I haven't gotten to that place yet, but it is this process that we have to be willing to do in order to truly make friends with conflict. Reverend Gary describes this process as a vehicle to move to authentic being and conscious doing. That's the place where we really are moving in the same direction with Spirit, when we can be authentic about who we are and how we're expressing and doing from that place of consciousness, not from the tapes and the promptings of our subconscious minds. And when we are applying our spiritual lens and practices to the conflict in our lives, we are living from our authentic self. When we can recognize it and express it, even if we don't know what to do with it, we are being more authentic. And authentic being leads to conscious doing. And here's how you know if you aren't acting from your authentic self. And it typically will be followed by the feeling of regret. Regret that we didn't say what we wanted to say, that we didn't act how we wanted to act. Whether that's positive or negative, there's some regret in there about how that whole exchange or how that whole relationship is unfolding. When you fail to speak your truth or act in integrity from your own values and from your own guiding principles. He writes this too, he says, not speaking our truth is a strategy that most of us learned as children. In fact, in some ways it was even encouraged as children. We all have been raised in some way to blend in. And if it wasn't when we were younger, certainly by our teenage years, because as I remember and as I've seen in a lot of teenagers, you don't want to stand out. Most don't. They want to blend in. And so in order to do that, we have to give up some of our own authentic self in order to be able to meet those needs and meet the needs of others. And that is exactly what keeps us disconnected from our wholeness, because our wholeness is our authentic self. We may not always know from our own sense of authenticity, and yet we are acutely aware when we're not being true to ourselves. We may not always recognize, look at me, I'm being authentic in this, but we know there's something within us that doesn't resonate as peace when we're not. And what we do in our lives fundamentally arises out of who we are. This is another way of understanding that all outer conflict comes from inner conflict. So what we do in our lives fundamentally arises out of who we are, and who we are is reinforced and made solid by what we do. So in order to break the cycle of we don't want to do that anymore, we have to begin to be willing to make the changes in here that allow us to come from that place of who we truly are. So authenticity becomes sort of the litmus test of our own self-worth. How often are we being authentic? The more we're being authentic, the more that we can know that we've got a pretty good, solid foundation of self-worth. It honors all that we are when we are being authentic. It values our flaws and mistakes when we are living from our authentic self, because it sees them as just another opportunity to grow, another opportunity to deepen our connection to God. So as we collectively and individually are seeking to not see conflict as something that we want to run or destroy or overcome, we want to make friends with it. We want to welcome it as part of our spiritual journey. So I invite you to join with me as we move into a time of meditation to see if we can't, in the midst of our own being, be willing to see conflict in a new lens. So right where you are, I just invite you to be comfortable. Put your feet on the floor. Allow your body to relax into the chair. And as you become aware of your body and what's unfolding in it right now, and become aware of the thoughts that are floating through your mind in this moment, I invite you to also become aware of your heart as it is rhythmically beating, as it always is beating, even in those large parts of our day when we're not aware of it doing its mighty work. Bringing this precious vital energy of blood to every part of our physical body. It is what enlivens this body that we live and breathe and have our being in this moment. And the heart is also the space where our spirit lives, where our soul finds its home. And so as we consciously connect with that in this moment, we connect with all there is. For the Christ of our being is one with the God of our universe. We are in that divine flow that continues to grow and evolve. And our soul is always calling us into greater and greater participation in that growth and evolution. And it's always the place that we can turn our awareness and attention so that we can experience peace in any moment. It is that very river of peace flowing through our being. So in this sacred and safe space, see if you can bring to mind a conflict. Perhaps it's one going on in your life right now, or perhaps it's one in the world. And see if you can visualize this conflict as an opportunity for your own spiritual growth and connection. See if you can allow Spirit to show you how this is being a mirror into some place within you that has yet to discover its wholeness, its worth, its beauty, its mission to be a light in this world. If it doesn't happen immediately, just sit with it for a moment and ask for this reflection to show you how Spirit is calling you. And if it doesn't arise in this little window of time, continue to ask, how is it that I can see this through the eyes of God? How can I plug in from this perspective? And have it be what guides, what shows up as me to express. And as you begin to bring your attention back to this time and to this space, know that this heart space, this sacred space of divine connection, is always available to you. As you breathe and focus your attention, you can rest for a moment here throughout your day. So see if you can be grateful for the conflicts that are currently in your life experience right now. And take with you that energy of gratitude as you move into the rest of this day and the days to come. Feel that sense of peace, that sense of aliveness vibrating through your whole being. Feel your body once again and your breath, and let that be a source of possibilities as you move into the rest of this day. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. So over the next couple of weeks, we are going to be exploring in a little bit more detail what Gary describes as the 4 winds of conflict. The 4 things that seem to blow us into this space of experiencing storms in our lives. They are separation, misperception, competition, and defensiveness. So just you can be thinking about how those different aspects might be showing up in your life. And we'll also understand the antidote to each one of these winds, the way in which we can allow those winds to calm as we focus on that. You know, making friends with conflict is not for sissies, as I like to say. So your invitation this week is to see if you can call upon your inner strength and your inner courage to let you begin to step into that next step, whatever it might be, whether it's the understanding step, whether it's the practicing step, whether it's to be willing to step back in to something that you think you've moved through and see if there's any residual work that needs to be done, or in that blessed place of peace. This is your call to be brave when it comes to conflict. Well, it is our opportunity now to share our financial good with this ministry. It takes all of us being willing to be a part and share of their financial good in order to do all that we are called to do. And we are so grateful for the many, many ways in which we receive our good. It's not just from the people sitting here or even the people out there virtually. There are unlimited channels from which we receive our good. We are so grateful this past year and even the year before that we were able to receive these PPP loans that allowed us to continue to do all that we were called to do with much greater ease and grace. And that's what your giving allows us to do. It opens up all of the possibilities. So we're grateful, so grateful for the ways in which we receive this abundant flow into our lives. For those of us who are watching virtually, those of you who are watching virtually, we want you to be in that flow of giving and receiving. We don't want you to miss out. So we would encourage and invite you to go to our centerofunity.org and the give page there. You can share with your good and then also receive an affirmation. If you scroll down, you'll see 6 different pictures, I believe. Just pick the one that resonates with you, and you will get your affirmation to bless you this week too. And we're working with Eye of the Storm, so you'll see many of the things that we're going to be talking about in these 7 weeks that we're on this series to remind and support you. No, Spirit picks it out just for you to work with this week. So join with me as we hold the gifts that we offer in our hands and in our hearts and bless them together. Divine love, as me, blesses and multiplies all that I give, all that I receive, and all that I am. Thank you, Father, Mother, God.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be, with God as our Father. Family, all are we. Let me walk with my family in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow. To take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
And so as we bravely go into this week, learning to make friends with conflict, we go, knowing our prayer for protection. Together, the light of God surrounds us. I am the light of God. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love of God. The power of God protects us. I am the power of God. The presence of God watches over us. I am the presence of God. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Have a beautiful week, everyone.